Hello and welcome to the second part of my course on Logic Pro music theory and creating trance music. In this video I'm going to show you how to create something like this. So that's maybe trance style music. Most of the people who are into trance these days are similar age to me, like 50 or something. But what I'm going to talk about applies to lots of different genres of music, and to an extent it applies to all kinds of music. So this is really just a tutorial on Logic Pro, and I'm just using this kind of style of music as an example to kind of get us going. And I just have to explain really quickly, I made a video 8 years ago, and in there I showed you how to create kind of a drum track in Logic Pro, and I was talking about how in the next video we're going to add a bass to it, but I never made that second video. I just randomly rediscovered this video I'd made 8 years ago, and it's got like nearly 4,000 views or something, so I thought I'd make a second part now, and now we're going to make this whole track here. Sorry it's been such a long wait. So first of all, let's create a new project. Let's go to File, New, and I'll close this project, and I don't want to save it because it's already saved. And by the way, if you are a complete beginner to making music with Logic Pro, I do recommend you watch that first video before watching this video. Okay, so let's create a software instrument here. By default, when we create a new project, we get this dialog that asks us to create a track to get started with, and I'm going to just accept the defaults and create a software instrument here. I'll just resize this to fit into my recording area, and so here's our first basic track. Now we want to recreate the drums that we had in the last video in this series, the one and only first video that I made 8 years ago, but now we've actually got a pattern editor in Logic Pro. So I'm using Logic Pro 10.74. It's actually 2024 when I'm recording this. So I'm going to show you how to create drums using the pattern editor now. If you, for some reason, don't have access to the pattern editor, try upgrading Logic Pro, and if you can't do that, just create drums using the ordinary MIDI editor as I showed you in the last video, and that will work just fine. But let's right click on this track here and go to create pattern region. So by default it's created a 4-bar region here. If I zoom in a bit with this control here that we saw in the last video, you can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 bars. So it starts at bar 1 and it finishes, so that would be bar 5 there, so it's finishing at bar 4. But the pattern editor by default will just let us work on 1 bar at a time, and then that's just kind of looped, which is kind of what we want. So we need to make sure the pattern editor is open, as it is down here. You can just double click it to open it and close it. And I want to select a drum machine. I'm going to go make sure the library is open here, and let's go to electronic drum kit. I have a slightly different selection to what I had 8 years ago, but usually anything with 808 or 909 in the name of it is going to be a very standard sort of drum machine. So let's try this 808 Flex. And now you can see we've got different drums down in this step sequencer or pattern editor here. So first of all we want the kick, as we saw in the last video, and I want a kick on the first beat of every bar. So this is just 1 bar here divided into 16 steps or intervals, and we want a kick on the first part of each of these kind of 4 main sections. So let's put a kick here just by clicking there, there and there. And if we play that now, in fact let's make this cycle. So again, we saw this in the last video. I'm just going to make this a whole cycle region, and I can press spacebar to play it. I can also press return to go to the beginning if I want. So if I stop it with the spacebar, if I hit return, it will go back to the beginning. Let's play the whole thing through. It's just a very simple kind of 4 on the floor beat at the moment. So if we were counting this, if we were counting the beats, we would go like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 beats in every bar. We've got 4 bars, so we're just repeating that 1, 2, 3, 4 over and over again, and we are in 4/4 time, the most common time signature by far in popular music. Now let's add a snare as we did last time. So I'm going to add the snare, one of these snares, on every other kick drum here. So let's add a snare there and there. We could try the other ones. They all sound a little bit different. So you just have to click to create these sounds and then get rid of them again with another click. Let's hear that. Okay, very cliched, at least it would have been in 1990 something, but it probably still is now to an extent. Okay, and we're going to do what we did before. We're going to have let's have a closed hi-hat on every beat. So here's a closed hi-hat sound. Sounds like that. You can listen to the sounds by double clicking there. So we'll have one on every, and then let's try putting an open hi-hat just kind of in between on the third interval of every quarter bar. Okay, it's kind of very cliched. It's not bad. So one thing we can do is here I can actually expand this drum machine icon, and I've got volume levels for the individual sounds. And another way to get volume levels and more besides is I can just double click that icon and then I get this sort of drum editor. So if I just run it, you can see which ones are firing, and that kind of open hi-hat sounds a bit rubbish to me, so I'm just going to click that. And then you get controls that by default only apply to that particular hi-hat. So you can see it says pad controls here. I'm going to maybe make it quieter. So I just drag my mouse down over this control and maybe add some reverb to make it sound like it's in a room and there's all kinds of random sounds bouncing off the walls. Let's try that. Well, I don't know. I'm going to maybe not put too much reverb on there, maybe a little bit. Reduce the volume a bit, maybe. I can also choose individual sounds here. So you can see that with the hi-hat selected, over here, I've actually got a selection of hi-hats showing in the library. So let's maybe try, I definitely want an open one there. Let's try some open hi-hats. I like that much more. I think that's much nicer. It's a very sort of 90s sound. Okay, let's click that off. So that's basically where we got to in the last video. And the next thing I want to do is add some kind of a bass to that. So again, I want to emphasize I'm not an expert on this. This is just something I do for a hobby. So like, I'm not saying that what I'm about to make would sound great in a club or anything. I hate clubs, but it's going to be a nice bass sound to listen to. So we'll add in a bass. I'm going to go to track and new software instrument track. So we get a new track here. And let's right click and create a MIDI region here. Now by default, we've got this classic electric piano on this track. So if I click in the piano roll down here, so if I make sure that's open by double clicking that, that's just a kind of electric piano sound. But I'm going to go to synthesizer, and actually rather than choose a bass, a sound that's explicitly designed to be a bass here, I'm actually going to go to this lead section, and what I'm interested in is this pulse echo lead, which I really like. One thing you can do to improve how your music sounds is definitely just spend more time trying out all the different sounds. But if we try this, it sounds pretty good. Now, You probably know music comes in different keys. For example, we could have music in the key of C major or music in the key of F minor or whatever. The minor and major keys are the most common scales, let's say, that you will find in popular music. They can actually be thought of as something called modes, but we're not going to deal with that in this particular video. What you have to know here is that most popular music, well, let's not say most of it, but the most common key that popular music is in would probably be C major. In a genre like trance, and I don't know much about modern music, I just hate most really modern music, but certainly in trance music, in kind of serious sounding dance music, you're quite likely to use a minor key, especially A minor. So let's say the most common keys are going to be typically, probably, at least in electronic music, they're going to be C major and A minor, I would think. And there's a kind of sound theoretical reason for that, which we'll probably eventually get into if I keep making videos in this course. But for now, that's all you need to know. Never mind about what C major and A minor actually are. You just need to know that. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make some music in C minor. And that's because it's going to be easier to illustrate concepts from music theory, I think, if I start in C minor rather than A minor, for reasons that have to do with complicated musical history. So, with that said, if I'm going to make music in the key of C minor, then the chord I would probably most often use would probably be the C minor chord. And don't worry if you don't know what these things mean, we're going to get into it eventually. And the bass sound that I would use perhaps the most in the music, or at least that I would finish on, would be the root note of that chord, which would be C. So all of that is a complicated way of basically saying that I want to use the C note for my bass. And you can see here on the keyboard, we've got C3, that's pretty high, C4 is even higher. Of course, all the C's are an octave apart, and they sound somehow similar because of that, what we call an interval of an octave between them. But I'm going to go down here and maybe try C1. That's a nice kind of bass sound. Now, a really typical thing to do in kind of late 90s trance or early 2000s would be you would have a bass that just kind of fell, you just had one note in between the notes of the kick drum. I'll show you what I mean. Let's first select just one bar so we can cycle over that. If I press the space bar now, we're just going to cycle over that one bar. Now I'm going to put down some C1 notes here. And if you look at this, so again, as with the pattern editor, it's divided into, well, I've got the division set to 16. So we've got 16 divisions here. But they basically come in sort of 4 broad stripes representing the kind of beats of the bar. And I'm interested in this first quarter of the bar here and the third interval in that, which is here. And if you get this wrong, you'll hear it when you play it. So let's just put down a bass note there. And then I'm going to go to the third interval in the second quarter of the bar. And then the third interval in the third quarter should be there. And we'll do and the same for the fourth quarter of the bar. And if you listen to that, that's a kind of bass that you get in so much dance music, especially trance. And the reason for that is because people were trying to maximize the power of the bass, really. And so you don't want the actual bass in that case sounding at the same time as the kick drum, because then they'd be competing for each other. To get the most bassy possible sound, you want the kick drum and the bass to alternate. But we're not going to do that here because it has got tremendously cliched, although it's still fun to listen to. For example, if you listen to Gigi D'Agostino, L'amour toujours, it's a great piece of music. Maybe it's cheesy, but it's great. And, you hear this all the way through it, so it can still sound surprisingly fresh. But what we're going to do here is add another note in, just after each of these notes that we put down, we're going to add another note in the next interval, like this. Let's play that. I think that sounds quite nice, but we're probably going to want to turn the bass down a bit with this control here. Now, what I don't like about that, for one thing, is that the bass notes kind of bleed into each other, and that has to do with how they decay. So when you release the note, like how does it tail off? How quickly does it stop sounding? But we can always get some controls of some sort if we double click the actual icon of the synthesizer that we're using here. So let's click that, and we see we've got a bunch of controls for the bass sound. And what I could try here is just pulling down this release. So the release is how long the note continues sounding for after you release the key, if you're actually playing it on a synthesizer or keyboard of some kind. So let's play it and pull down the release a bit. So we can try pulling that down a bit, and it's going to sound a little bit less muddy. What I can also do, which is a really great thing to do, is play around with cutoff and resonance. So cutoff by itself, this is a filter which, when I turn it down, it's going to kind of reduce the high frequencies in the note. And if I turn it up, it's going to allow those high frequencies to be there. So let's just try that. Down. So now you only hear the kind of more bassier notes. And if I move it up, you hear a lot more of the high notes, which are not necessarily pleasant in extreme. But what sounds really good is if you add a bit of resonance and then alter the cutoff. The resonance gets its name from the way filters used to behave in a way back in the days when they were implemented with hardware, where they had a kind of resonant frequency, and they would actually emphasize some frequencies at the kind of cutoff point of the filter. But you don't really need to know all that stuff. All you need to know is it sounds good. Let's turn it up a little bit and then play around with the cutoff. We can also try changing the release, of course. And of course, there's no harm in trying the other controls as well if you want. I think that sounds pretty okay though. I think typically, and again, emphasizing I'm not an expert, typically there isn't going to be much reverb on drums or bass, at least in the trance genre, because you want it to feel kind of very present, very kind of strong and in your face. And when you add reverb, it makes things sound more in the background, almost a little bit, you could almost say mystical, but that depends on the sound and the genre. But the reverb, it's like, you know, if you think of a church that has huge reverb, it's not the same as echo. The reverb is caused by lots of sounds reflecting off different surfaces, and it kind of extends the sound, makes it sound more like it's in a big hollow space, and it's a really important effect to be able to use. But on bass, it doesn't sound good usually to have a huge amount of reverb. It's an interesting sound, but it's going to make the bass more muddy, so I'm going to keep that fairly low. Okay, so now let's extend that over all 4 bars. And the way I'm going to do that is if you move your mouse over the edge of the MIDI region, it changes, the icon changes depending on where it is, whether it's in the lower bit or the upper bit here. So in the lower bit, if I drag it, it would just extend this MIDI region, make it bigger so I could add more notes. But what I want is to loop it. So if you put it over the upper bit of the end here, you get like a loop symbol, and then I can drag it out. So I'm just repeating the sound over 4 bars. And let's go down a bit here. And this 808 flex thing, I'm going to loop that. I'm going to loop it up to the 9th bar. So I've got 8 bars of it. Because in music, things tend to come in 8 bars, you know, like a chorus might be 8 bars, a verse might be 8 bars, or twice that's 16 bars. So a lot of things are going to be in 8 bars. And it's because 8 is a power of 2. It just ends up sounding repetitive in a nice way. So let's change the cycle to cycle over all 8 bars now. And this, I'm actually going to duplicate it. And to do that, I'm going to hold down the Option key, and I'm going to use my mouse to drag this first portion, starting from the bit that's not looped, this first bit here. I'm going to just drag it with the Option key held down. Now it's really important that I release the mouse before I release the Option key, otherwise it will move it. So I release the mouse, and I've created a copy here that fills up the next 4 bars. But what I want to do now is alter the notes in the copy. So I'm going to click in the grey area to make sure nothing's selected, and double click this copy that I made here, taking care to double click in this first unlooped portion. I'm not sure what happens if I double click elsewhere actually. Actually, that also works, so that would also be fine. Sometimes you end up accidentally cutting the loop short by clicking in the wrong place. Now, I want to select all of these, so I'll just drag my mouse around them. You can use the zoom controls here. So these kind of shadowy versions of the notes, they're in the looped area. So they will just follow whatever I do with this bit here, which is the basis of the loop. I'm going to select that, and I want to drag these down to G. And by the way, if you want homework, apart from replicating this, I would suggest learning the notes here. So we've got on the keyboard C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and the C's are all labelled to make it nice and easy. So I want to drag these down to G here. And there is a kind of technical reason in music theory as to why I'm choosing G. Of course, you can choose anything, and potentially anything can sound good depending on what's going to be in your music, but it does sound particularly pleasing to go from a C to a G, and there's a technical reason for that we'll go into probably later on if I keep making these videos. But let's select all of those notes, drag them straight down to G, and then if I play the whole thing, sounds quite good. Okay, so now let's add in some chords. So I'm going to go to Track, New Software Instrument Track. And now I want to use some kind of long drawn out sound. So in fact, let's go to Synthesizer, Pad, or we could use strings. And I'm going to just choose something here. It's probably not going to sound good at first, but we're going to work on it. We just want some long drawn out sound that we can use to easily construct chords here. So let's try, for example, infinity strings. Right click in this grey region to create a MIDI region. And I'll actually just select that for the moment, just that 1 bar. Double click this to open the editor if it's not open already. And now, so I've got this bass that's on the C there. And what I want here is a C chord. Let's start with the C major chord. So I'm going to hold down Command, and so that's, if I hold this down, you can hear the sound of it. Actually, I forgot infinity strings has got kind of an oscillating sound to it, which I don't really want. Let's try infinity pad and hold down a C. okay, that's the kind of thing I really need right now. So I'm going to hold down Command and just click. You see that when I press Command, the icon's going to change to a sort of pencil. And I just click by the C there, and that creates a note. The length of it depends on the last note that you created. So what I want to do here is just drag the edge of that and make it fill the entire bar for the moment. Now, to create a C major chord, so the smallest interval on in Western music that we use is called the semitone, or maybe it's called half note or a half tone or something like that in America. In the UK, we would call it a semitone. And an example of a semitone would be from C to C sharp here. Also, within these 12 musical notes, from E to F, that's a semitone, and from B to C, or from F to F sharp, these are all semitones. So if we could count up one entire octave in semitones, and would find there are 12 semitones in an octave. So we start on a root note, C, and that's up to here is one semitone. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 semitones. So to construct a C chord, what we want to do is we want to go up 4 semitones, so from the root note. So we start on C. If you want to count that would be 0 semitones, and then we go up to here, 1 semitone, 2, 3, 4, and we land on E. And this is how all major chords are constructed, and we just put a note there at the E. And now we want to go up another 3 semitones and put a note there. So from the E, so that's 0, 1, 2, 3, we land on the G and put a note there. If you've done this right, if you select all of those notes with the mouse, Logic Pro tells you you've got a C. It means a C chord. It means actually C major. So if we play this, it's got a very happy sound to it. Now we can actually make it sound more serious by changing it to a C minor. And what we're doing here applies to all chords. It works on every chord. It's just a question of what root note you start from. So if I go to this middle note here, the E, and move it down to this, which is D sharp or E flat, depending on how you want to call it, it sounds a lot more serious. Let's go with that. So now I want to put the mouse over the upper portion of the end of this MIDI segment and just drag it out here so that we can create a loop. I'm going to stop at 5 there. Then I'm going to drag this with the Option key held down to fill up the second half of the 8 bars. And we're going to change this second half a bit. Let's select from bar 5 to 6, so bar 5 there, and just loop that with the space bar. So when we play the first bar here, it sounds good. When we play bar 5, it sounds bad. And the reason for that is, so the bass, if you remember, in the second half of these 8 bars is on the note G. The note G is not in the chord of C minor. What I want to do is now change this to I'm going to change it to a G minor chord. So let's double click this here. So make sure you're changing this one and not this one. We want to change that one. Put the cursor into this 5th bar. And then, so how would we build up G? Let's get rid of that. Actually, it was a bit pointless me making a copy of it because I just deleted it anyway. But you could change the one you've got, but maybe it's easier if we just start again. It's more instructive. So I'm going to start with G, the G above C3. I'm going to put that in. So I need there, that's G. And then we count up semitones. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's B. And then from B, go to C is 1 semitone, C sharp 2, and D is 3 semitones, so we want a D. So that's the pattern of a major chord. You have a 4 semitone interval between the first two notes in it, and a 3 semitone interval between the second two notes. So if you select all of that, that would now be G major. So it sounds good, but it doesn't really match our first chord too well, partly because it's major. Let's make it minor. So to make it minor, all we have to do is drag down the middle note 1 semitone. So now we've got an interval between the first two notes of 3 semitones and an interval between the second two notes of 4 semitones. So 1, 2, 3, 4. When you count, you always have to start counting on the note after the one that you sort of start from in the interval, because you want to know how many you're interested in the spacing between the notes, not how many notes there are. So that's one interval above G is there, 2, 3, that's 3 intervals above this G. Okay, so now if we select both of those, you can see that there's quite a big sort of jump from these 3 notes, which are in shadow here because they're in this bit which I'm not currently working on. There's a big jump from those to these, and we want to make them more similar to sound nicer. So you can see that this G here, I'm using it here, and I'm using it in the second half of these 8 bars also. So that's fine, that's good. But these two they're kind of really high. So let's take this one, and I want to move it exactly 12 semitones down. And an easy way to do that is just to select it, make sure nothing else is selected, just that. Hold down the Option key, and then use the down arrow on your keyboard. Press the down arrow 12 times, and you'll notice now it's at D, so we want to move it down to D here. So let's try that. Select it, Option key, and down arrow 12 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And now it's much closer to the notes of this chord that I created for the first half of the 8 bars. Let's do the same to this as well. So, or I could drag it manually. So let's maybe do that for a change. So this note here is A, and that's A sharp. So we want to drag it down to the same position down here, which will be there. Now let's listen to the whole thing, see how it sounds. So I select the whole lot and then press the space bar. So it's sounding pretty okay. Like there's nothing dissonant in there. There are no kind of clashing musical sounds. Sometimes you want dissonance, but I think when you're starting off, in particular, you want to kind of strive towards consonants, things that sound nice, and then later on you can kind of break the rules if you want to, and do so knowingly. Now let's create a little arpeggio. So I'm going to create a new track, new software instrument track. And I'm going to use, let's go to synthesizer and classics, I think, and maybe micro pulse. I'll try that. And I'm going to right click, create MIDI region. Let's select just the first bar here and then double click that. Maybe zoom in a bit and try to get this in the middle with the scroll bars here. Okay, so that's one bar that we're looking at here, and if we listen to this micro pulse sound, it sounds like that. Now an arpeggio is kind of where instead of playing the notes of a chord all at once, you play them one after the other in some kind of a sequence. And you can arpeggiate chords automatically with a little plugin that comes with Logic Pro, but we're going to make one by hand here so you can see how it works. If you listen to some of the earliest music of Vince Clarke, for example, he was working with synthesizers with Yazoo if I've got that right. I think so. Yeah, and later on he was with Depeche Mode for a while. But when he first started out, his synthesizers couldn't play two notes at the same time, so you don't hear any chords. For example, in the song "Only You" by Yazoo, you're only hearing, I think, arpeggios, because his synthesizer couldn't play two notes at the same time. But it sounds really good, and you hear arpeggios everywhere in trance music. And also in classical music, where they may get referred to as an ostinato instead. But it's kind of the same idea, I think, or pretty similar. So let's try to find a note of a kind of fairly high pitch here, but not too high. I think this might work quite well. So I want the notes of a C chord. And it doesn't have to be the notes of a C chord, but that's just the simplest option that I can go with right now. I want the notes of a C chord arranged in some pattern, but not playing all at the same time. So I'm going to start with C, hold down Command, and I get a note here that's much longer than I want. I'm going to reduce it to just one single interval, one single 16th interval. So the second note up in the scale that's in C minor is this D sharp. So I want to put a D sharp here. And then let's go back to C again. And then what's the highest note in the C minor chord? Well, that will be, it's actually G. Let's put a G in here. Actually, if I select all of these now, it actually says CM, meaning C minor. But now they're not playing all at the same time. They're playing one after the other. And I can repeat that. I can just do this manually pretty easily. Let's maybe put in the C's. Or another way to make it repeat would be, let's size it. So I just have the bit that I've already filled in like this, and then loop that. That also works. And in fact, if I select that and right click, I can go to convert loops to regions. And now I've got 4 separate MIDI regions with those notes in. And if I do Command J, or I right click and I go to join, there we go. It will join them all together, and now it saves me typing them all, but you can just type them all out if you want. Let's listen to it. Oh, it sounds pretty good, I think. Now let's loop that like this. And then let's create a copy of that. So I hold down Option and then just drag this to the second half of these 8 bars, and let's select the first bar of the second half, so bar 5, and then click that to edit it. Click this second MIDI region there. Now I want to change these so they only use notes that are in the G minor chord. What notes are in G minor? Well, we've got them here, of course. So it's, what is that? That's A sharp, D, and G. That forms G minor. These are not in the kind of standard basic position for the chord because I moved these 2 down, but that's okay. So I want to just change my arpeggio here so that it only has these notes in it. So A sharp, D and G. Let's do that. So this one, let's maybe, which one's closer to A sharp? It's hard to say really. So these notes here, they're kind of the most important notes in this arpeggio because they're repeated over and over again, and they are the root note of, in this case at the moment, the C minor chord. So let's move those to G. Let's just move them down to G here. And then these notes here in the middle, let's maybe put these at A sharp, and let's take these notes here and move them down to D, and let's just see how that sounds. So if you select both of those regions, then if we just zoom out a bit, so there's the kind of boundary between these 2 regions here. And do they kind of approximately match up? Well, sort of almost, but what about maybe if we put this G higher then it would match up with this G that's already in this C chord that we use, the C minor, for the first half. Let's take that, all of these, and hold down Option and move it up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then there's a kind of much closer match between these and these in terms of their position. Let's listen to that. That still sounds good, I think. Let's just have a listen to the whole thing. I'm not sure if this is exactly what I did before, but I did something similar before. One thing I noticed is that by moving that root note up, it does kind of disrupt the feel of the pattern a little bit. It changes it a little bit. So it's kind of up to you whether you want to put it up there or leave it at G down here. Because maybe that sounds better. Sound better actually. Another thing you could try is moving the entire pattern up an octave. If you just click somewhere in the grey area and do Command A to select everything, and then use Option and press the up arrow 12 times to move them all up. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. See how that sounds. I think I preferred it how it was, so let's move it down again. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, an octave down. Okay, so one thing that we can do is click the icon again and experiment with the cutoff. I like to add some resonance here usually. Let's experiment with the decay a bit maybe and the cutoff. Let's try that. And also, and this is something that will really make a huge difference to your sounds, and it's kind of a fairly big topic, but let's kind of dip into it a little bit. What we can do is add a little bit of reverb, which is going to sound especially good on string sounds and anything that's used to make an arpeggio like this. So if you make sure you've got this I clicked, that gives you track information. It gives you information about the track here. Let's get rid of the library by clicking the library icon. So take a look at this here. Actually, maybe I'll put the library back so we've got this in the middle here. You can see it says bus 5 and bus 2 when we've got micropulse selected. What are those? Well, the buses are kind of tracks on your virtual mixing desk, which you can see by pressing X. So there you've got a kind of mixer. Let's press X again to get rid of it. Then bring it back again. But you can see if we look at these labels up here, some of them have got instruments on them and some of them haven't got instruments. They're just buses that we can put effects on. And bus 5, 6 and 2 here, they all have Space Designer on it, and the Space Designer is for creating reverb. They've also got some channel EQ on there as well. So let's just get rid of those. And what we can do is we can use these little faders here to send some of the signal from our track to those buses. And those buses have different kinds of reverb on them, just because we selected this micro pulse instrument from the library. So I can try increasing the amount of signal that I send to that reverb, and then we'll get basically more reverb on a micro pulse. Let's listen to it. So actually, I'm just going to click S to solo this track for the moment. And then I'm going to try sending more signal to bus 2 here. So remember, you've got to have this I for information, track information on. And let's just hold the mouse down over this and move it upwards to rotate that knob. That's quite a strong effect. It's not subtle. Okay, let's try doing that on the other one, bus 5. So you can hear that they both add reverb. They make it sound as though that sound is playing in some kind of space, and it could be like a church, or it could be a recording studio, or even a tin can. But you can hear it's kind of echoing with lots of different echoes all at the same time off some walls somewhere. So you can adjust these to make it sound how you want. And that's going to make the sound, tends to make it sound kind of further away, because when a sound source is close to you, you hear the sound it's making directly, whereas when you're further away from it, you hear more of the reverb mixed with the original sound, so the reverb makes things sound further away. I quite like that though. Let's do the same with this infinity pad. I'm not necessarily even going to use that, but let's just try it. So I want to solo that now. And we actually haven't got any pre-made sends here, effect sends, but where it says sends, I can click that and go to bus, and let's try bus 2. So I can send it to the effect that was created when I created that micro pulse track, and send some signal to this. It's not as easy to hear as it is with some sound that has a sharp decay, a sharp release that finishes quickly, in other words. But it does sound really good on strings and choral sounds and so on. So now let's listen to this all together. Move this string down a bit. I'm just going to save this with Command and S. I'll save that as demo 2, I think. Now, what I did on the track that I played you at the start of this video was I actually used something a bit crazier sounding than this infinity pad. Let's go to pads and scroll down here and look for Jupiter Rising, I think it's called. Here it is, let's try that. So I didn't want to use this to demonstrate chords to you, because it's a little bit harder to hear what's going on with it, but it's got a pretty crazy, interesting sound. And we can try adding, see, I've lost the sends because I changed a different instrument in the library, and each instrument has pre-programmed sends. But let's add a send to it and maybe go to this bus 2 large plate reverb and add some reverb. Now let's hear it in context. And also we can actually make this micro pulse, we can actually change the cutoff of it as we kind of go along, so that it feels like it's kind of opening up. It's kind of making an interesting, very characteristic sound. So you'll see what I mean. With that track selected, micropulse, I'm going to just hit the A key, and then we're going to see the automation options here. If I press A again, that will go away. That's also got to be in one of the menus, but I'm not actually sure which one, so let's just stick with hitting the A key. And now I want to change this, where it says volume, I want to change that to, so let's go to Smart Controls here and go to Cutoff. I want to change the setting of this cutoff filter, because that can make a very nice sound and kind of give some movement to the sound and make it feel like it's developing. And I'm just going to click here in the track, and you can see we've got a line here that we can adjust. We can add nodes to this just by clicking on it anywhere we like. Let's click at the end here, and then I'm going to just move that up so we've got a gradually increasing filter cutoff on this micropulse sound, and if I press spacebar to play, let's make it start lower. Let's try that. No, it's too low at the start. Let's make it like 8% or something like that. Maybe a bit lower at the end. See how that sounds at the end. Yeah, that's not too bad. So it kind of sounds sort of subdued at the beginning. You feel it's being held back, but it's gradually becoming more powerful. You're hearing more of those higher frequencies, and together with a little bit of resonance in there, it produces this characteristic, really nice sound that you hear in trance music all the time, certainly. You could try increasing the resonance if you like. So what we're doing is automating this knob here, basically. You can see it actually changing by itself. Let's try more decay. Longer decay might sound good. Okay, let's stop that and get rid of the solo. You can also mute tracks, by the way, with this M key here. I want to press A to clear the automation view, and I'm just going to adjust the faders a little bit. Maybe give a shorter decay to that bass. I don't know. Maybe it's good how it is. Less resonance, maybe lower cutoff. Well, anyway, clearly you could fiddle with this for a long time. So you can also change the track colours if you right click and go to assign track colour, but I must admit I don't really bother because I don't really care usually what colour they're actually in, but that is something you can do if you want. Okay, so that's it for this video. I'm going to see how many people watch this video. I'm curious now. But if it's a lot, then I'll probably make a third video. And there's so much more stuff we can go over, both in terms of Logic Pro and music theory. So do let me know what you're more interested in, what genre of music you're interested in, and what you want to learn, and maybe I'll make a video about that. And until next time, happy composing. Oh yeah, I almost forgot though, I've recorded this all in 120, but if this was trance it would be more like 135 or 140 or something, so let's click there and change the tempo.